And you've just heard Spells by Robin Miller, taken from his album Beelines. And I'm so pleased to be joined by Robin now. Hello, Robin.
Hello, Alistair. How are you getting on?
I'm well, thank you. So my first question is, what can you tell us about Beelines? Because it's a terrific album.
Thank you very much. It's probably been it's something I've always wanted to do since I, became halfway kind of competent on the guitar. I always wanted to do an album of just solo acoustic guitar instrumentals, because that it feels to me like that's my kind of safe place. That's my kind of home type of thing. I loved the music of Bert Jansch and Davy Graham and all those kind of folk, the 60s folkies when I was learning to play, and even listening to them now, it still feels it's my favorite music, I think. So yeah, the whole album feels like a kind of a tribute to them in a way, and yeah, it's just quite close to home for me.
Because it's kind of, to do the whole album instrumental is fairly rare these days, it's and it's interesting to hear those influences, because again, I think in terms of I think folk music and traditional music in Scotland is really booming at the moment, but sometimes the originators, or at least the kind of early folk, are maybe not forgotten about, but maybe just not spoken about as much.
I mean, I think there's all these kind of various strands of folk music as well. Like when I grew up in Islay off the west coast, and I suppose you would more predominantly hear like accordion music and fiddle music and stuff like that. But I discovered this whole other type of folk music that was going on in the background, and it wasn't ever really mainstream. It was always a kind of cult, I think, the whole pentangle and all these kind of folk. And when I first moved to Glasgow from Islay, I discovered that all these people were playing in these tiny wee folk clubs, and you could be in a room with like 20 folk sitting at the feet of these guys. To me, were the masters, and then around late 80s, early 90s, there was a kind of secondary folk revival in Scotland. I've always felt, with the Celtic connections and more kind of recognition of the importance of folk music in Scotland. So after a wee while, you couldn't see Bert Jansch in the tiny wee folk club. You could see him in the Royal Concert Hall, which was obviously great for those kind of folk, So
I hadn't really thought about the impact of Celtic Connections, because it's become one of the biggest music festivals around. It's huge over the years, yeah. But it had folk and trad music. I mean, now there's all sorts of music involved in it, a lot of world music and even indie music and things like that. But at its heart, it was folk and trad tradition, and a lot of those names, as you say, suddenly they were selling out the concert hall or the city halls or places like that.
Yeah, like when I was a kid, and when I first started playing guitar, like you wouldn't see an awful lot of folk music, and yeah. Folk music wasn't kind of cool. You would the Corries would be on TV, but that was something that your granny watched. Even though the Corries like actually produced some great music, there was still that kind of tartan element to folk music, and but like now it's a completely different story. I think it's very much valued in Scotland, and as an important part of the culture. Another thing on Islay, when I was wee, on the rare occasion I went to Ceilidh. Ceilidhs weren't these kind of mad things with everybody going wild and dancing. They were much more kind of somber, with people singing unaccompanied and all that kind of stuff. It's just different understandings of folk and the folk tradition, I think. But like now it feels very healthy. There's this huge amount of music, coming from all sorts of amalgamations of traditional and electronic and everything like that.
It's a really vibrant kind of area of music in Scotland at the moment. But so going back to your own guitar playing, how do you describe it? Is it purely folk? Because to me, there's some other things going on there as well.
I don't know, Alistair. Yeah, it probably is folk because it's one guy and an acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I really liked all kinds of music when I was learning, and still do. I really like you know what became the world music. You know, there's lots of amazing West African guitarists and stuff like that who really inspired me. And I also really like psychedelic music. Like I love the kind of improvisation of people like the Quicksilver Messenger Service and all that kind of stuff, you know. So, you know, I did play quite a lot of that. And, you know, that's probably in the compositions on my album somewhere, you know. So and that's as important to me as traditional Scottish or Irish folk music, you know.
And when did you first pick up a guitar? And when you did you always know that this was the kind of music you wanted to make?
Yeah, I probably got a guitar when I was about 13 or 14, and yeah, I wasn't really a quick learner, so but I was quite kind of determined, you know. So and living in Islay, it was quite difficult to, you know, hardly anybody played the guitar. There were a few guys I was at school with who liked metal, you know, so you couldn't get any books, there was no internet and all that kind of stuff. So it was mostly learning from old records, you know, that, you know, taking the needle back and playing tracks again and again, you know. So, but yeah, the people that I learned kind of the kind of acoustic style that I do would be Leonard Cohen and, you know, John Renburn and all these kind of folk, you know. With Leonard Cohen, because his guitar playing is very simple. He's a good person to learn from to start with. You know?
I mean, it's someone you don't even maybe consider, or maybe just myself, but as a guitar player, you think of him first and foremost as the kind of songwriter. But you're right. Right.
Those were some of the first tunes that I learned were Leonard Cohen songs, and you know, on his records, it's virtually his early records, it's really only him and the guitars. You can hear the guitar very clearly.
Yeah.
So after spending a while learning his songs and learning some technique, then it was more possible to play more complex things, you know.
I was just wondering, you know, if you're getting a guitar at 13, a lot of people, depending when, you know, what period you were, want to be Eddie Van Halen or, you know, Stevie Vai, or, you know, this idea. So do you have any kind of unlikely guitar heroes that we wouldn't expect listening to your music?
Yeah, probably like Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead and Carlos Santana and these kind of folk, you know. I can remember watching a Woodstock for the first time, probably as a teenager in Islay, and if, you know, I'm blowing my mind as the saying goes, you know, and, you know, just realizing that there was this huge amount of music out there that, you know, Santana in particular, just the whole global sound of their early records, you know, so that, you know, it leads you down a rabbit hole to all sorts of other interesting things, you know. Whether anybody gets that from my album or not, I don't know.
Because I think with maybe with the guitar more than anything else, but everyone's got, no matter what music you make, there's usually something that, you know, you're really passionate about that maybe you don't directly use in terms of your sound. And that, I mean, I can imagine, when I go back to thinking about what music programs there were on television, say in the 70s and 80s, and it was Top of the Pops and, you know, not many others, to see a film like Woodstock where it's a whole, you know, weekend of incredible music and people playing full sets, and I can see the influence that it might have on someone.
Yeah, I mean at that time in the 80s and stuff like that, you know, nowadays you can just get anything you want on YouTube, but back then, archive rock footage, it was gold dust, you know.
Absolutely was. And if you're lucky enough to have a VCR, you were recording it and wearing it out, watching it again and again. Talking about live gigs, I think you had your album launch in Dunoon Borough Hall recently, yeah?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, like I live in a wee village called Ellen, which is near Dunoon. So, and Dunoon Borough Hall has been quite an important part of the art scene in Dunoon. And yeah, it felt quite important for me to do the launch gig there. So it was and I was very lucky. It was actually, there was an exhibition of vintage album covers on in the gallery space where I did my album launch. So I was playing underneath a selection of Blue Note album covers. So it was pretty much perfect as far as the backdrop goes. So
it's for people who don't know it, it's a great art centre for well, anyway, we were over recently to record a podcast. There was an exhibition on Helm Arts, an exhibition on there, and that album covers one that you were talking about. I really wanted to see that, and just time had got away from me because it looked fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. So yeah, at the album launch, I played lots of the tracks from my album, and it was really nice to do that live. I don't do it live very often, you know. So yeah, and also because of COVID, a lot of the smaller venues are just starting opening up as well. So it was one of the first kind of gigs that the Borough Hall has done for a year and a half, you know. So a wee bit of a trial for everybody, learning how to do all these things again, you know.
No, absolutely. Well, and do you have any plans to play any more live gigs? Are you gonna?
Yeah, I'm hoping to see if I can get some stuff booked as well. Probably around the West Coast, and it'd be nice to get something in Glasgow and stuff as well. So yeah, working on that at the moment. That's the next plan. I also play with a friend, Andy Crossan, and we do kind of bluesy, rootsy type music with harmonies. It's vocal, it's not instrumental. So yeah, we did our first gig in Girvan a couple of weeks ago. So that was the first one for a year and a half. So yeah, just stepping gingerly back into the live circuit, you know. So
yeah, I think everyone feels the same way. I went to my first gig a couple of weekends ago, and it was a small venue, and you think, oh, a bit of trepidation, but it was fantastic once we was back into it. Yeah. I think live music is something we've all been missing hugely.
Absolutely, and I wonder if you know, all musicians have been, you know, frantically writing new songs and all that kind of stuff for the last year and a half. So we'll may suddenly get an avalanche of complete masterpieces from everybody, you know. So
huge
quadruple albums,
Bruce Springsteen length gigs, you know, 3 hours long and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Robin, it's been lovely chatting to you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
And yourself, Alistair. Really nice to talk to you.
And this is Robin Miller and the title track of the album, Beelines.